So you're a musician, but you don't want to learn music theory.
Offspin Media Friends presents So, You Want to Be a Professional Musician? Hosted by Rajesh Ravi.
Hello, this is singer-songwriter and music producer Rajesh Ravi. In this episode, we're going to be talking about music theory and whether you need it, or rather, when do you need it. First, let's start with what music theory is. Music theory is different from music fundamentals. Music fundamentals is just understanding music and how melody, harmony, and rhythm relate to each other. Music theory is the ability to translate that into spoken language. For example, languages like English, Sanskrit, Kannada, Italian, Mandarin Chinese, Arabic, etc. Now, in my experience at least, I have never heard anyone arguing against understanding music fundamentals, but I've always heard this argument of not wanting to learn music theory. So, before my generation, the only way for people to learn was to transcribe by listening to songs. They had to listen to these songs, and if they wanted to figure out certain parts, trial and error was the only way. And this is what helped them understand music on a very fundamental level. And they would usually interact or work with other musicians who also had this fundamental understanding, which is why there was no real need to be able to translate this into spoken language. Everyone in the room just understood music on a fundamental level. Mine was the first generation where we could go on the internet, and especially for instruments like guitar or bass guitar, you had tabs. Everything was written. You just had to, in a sense, mug them up and play them on your instrument, and you got it. So, what happens is this produces an entire generation of musicians who don't really know what they're playing. They know where to place their fingers on their instruments, but they don't really know what they're doing in a music fundamental sense. Hence, the need for music theory. The need for not only understanding the fundamentals of music, but to be able to translate them into some spoken language, like the previous ones I mentioned. This makes it much easier for musicians to communicate with each other when collaborating, but more importantly, even when writing your own music. This is definitely going to help you. Or is it? So, what we're going to do is, I'm going to pick different types of musicians and talk about how important music theory is for that particular type of musician. So, let's say you're a music composer or producer or aspire to be one. Well, in this case, it's very straightforward. Of course, you have to know music theory. Because if you want to be a working professional music composer or even a music arranger, music programmer, music producer, any of these roles, you are going to have to be able to produce music or compose music in a variety of genres. And the only thing that is going to help you here is music theory. And again, especially if you're having to communicate with other musicians as a producer or composer, you're going to need some spoken language in which you can communicate that to them, as opposed to just saying what they're fundamentally doing is wrong, but not being able to explain it to them in a language that you all speak, whether it's English or Hindi or any other such language. So, yeah, this one is pretty simple. If you're a composer, arranger, programmer, producer, you need music theory. Okay, cool. So, what about people who are just instrumentalists? If you're a pianist or a keyboard player, you most probably already know music theory because, at least in today's day and age, I'm not aware of casual piano or keyboard learners or piano or keyboard learners who are casual beyond a very beginner point. Like, if you've taken even some interest in this instrument, there's a very high chance that by now you are learning from a music teacher, whether it's online or in person. And theory is a huge part of this. In fact, pianist can come under the same category as music composer or producer because most music composers and producers are piano players. Another set of musicians who I can safely say know music theory are people that learn classical music because there's no way to learn it casually. And again, it's one of those things where theory is taught to you right from the beginning. Now, third category of instrumentalists, which are percussionists, whether it's Eastern, Western, doesn't matter. I feel with them, even if they may not know theory, for percussion players, just understanding rhythmic fundamentals is more than enough. I mean, there's no harm in choosing to learn theory, of course, it helps you communicate and articulate better. But because there's usually not going to be any clash with harmonic or melodic players in an ensemble setting, or even if you're a session percussion player or a drummer, on the one hand, you just can't become a percussionist or a drummer without understanding the basic fundamentals of rhythm. And on the other hand, there isn't really going to be too much scope for miscommunication with other musicians or a music composer or producer when you're in a work situation, which leaves us with guitar and bass players. What's unique about these two types of players is, apart from being the majority of instrumentalists that are probably listening to this podcast, is that guitar players and bass players are people who can get away with not knowing music theory or even understanding the fundamentals of music. Typically, many guitarists and bass players realize their lack of knowledge or how their lack of theoretical knowledge is affecting them only much later into, say, a semi professional career. This realization can come for guitarists and bass players when they're doing session work, or when they're writing music as part of a band, or even playing as part of a cover band. And in these cases, a lack of knowledge can cost you dearly. For example, say you're a guitar player and you've been approached by some singer to do a cover gig at some private party or a restaurant or a pub, and there's no other keyboardist, there's no one else. You are the only harmonic player there. So naturally, the onus of figuring out the chords or the harmonies are on you. And if you don't know how to figure out chords for a song, well, you've lost that job. It's as simple as that. Or let's take a scenario in which you've been hired as a session guitar player, and say the composer or the music producer or the artist is telling you the solo you're playing or the parts you're playing are a little too pentatonic. We need it a little more melodic, and we need it melodic in this scale. Or in this part, there's a scale change happening, and what you're playing is clashing with that. Can you play along to the scale change? Or the composer or the producer tells you, you know, what you're playing is correct, but you're playing everything half a beat late or half a beat too early. We just need you to shift it by half a beat. And if all of these things fly over your head, guess who's never getting called for work again? So rather than you waiting for it to hit you then, the earlier you start learning music theory, the earlier you start understanding the fundamentals of music, the better it's going to be for you. Cool. But then what about singers? Now, when it comes to singers, I'd like to break this down into two types. Now, one scenario is in which you're a singer songwriter. That is, you're someone who not only sings and writes songs, but also someone who plays an accompanying instrument. Now, again, sure, you can get away with not knowing music theory here, but here's how music theory can help you. If your melodic, rhythmic, and harmonic fundamentals are sorted, what that does is, when you're sitting to write songs, instead of breaking your head to figure out chord structures or harmonic structures, what will happen is you'll have every possible option laid out in front of you. And now, whatever time you take in deciding on your structure will not be about whether something is right or wrong, but it'll be more about, okay, these are all the options I have laid in front of me. What do I feel like doing? And that's just one plus of knowing music theory. The other big plus is every genre has certain aesthetics, and that also includes harmonic aesthetics and rhythmic structures. You knowing music theory enables you that much more to write music or write songs in a variety of genres. But now, what if you're just a singer? You don't play any instrument, you just write melodies and lyrics and sing them. Or maybe you're not even someone who writes songs, you're just someone who plays cover gigs. Or maybe you do both. Well, of course, here there's even lesser of a need for music theory, but I would still urge you to learn music theory, and here's why. Let's look at a scenario in which you think there's absolutely no need for music theory. For instance, you're a singer and you've been booked to play a cover gig where you're just told to play popular Hindi or English songs. And you only have the budget to hire a guitar player and a cajon player. So you do. Except now, when you're rehearsing, something's not sounding right and you're not able to tell what it is. You try to talk to the guitarist is very confident in the songs that he or she is playing. But for some reason, something still sounds wrong. You just can't figure out what it is. You're trying to figure out what it is, but you can't. And but something feels off. Okay, I can just keep saying this on and on again using different words in a loop. This is exactly how stuck you'll feel if you don't know music theory. And not only from personal experience, but from the experience of a lot of other musicians that I know over the years, this is not uncommon. It is not uncommon for four musicians or even five musicians sometimes to be jamming together on cover songs and get stuck like this, where nobody in the room knows how to solve the problem. Even though there's a very simple and obvious solution to it, the thing is, because of everyone's lack of knowledge, everyone is stuck. This happens way more commonly than you think. And yeah, sure, in a situation like this, you can blame everyone. Like, hey, everyone's to blame because No one knows the fundamentals or theory. However, in this scenario that I described, you are the one that got the gig. You're the one that's dealing with the client. The client does not care that your musicians don't know the thing they're supposed to know. The blame is on you. You're the one that gets screwed. You're the one that loses the job or loses future jobs because, you couldn't deliver. So again, on the surface, it may seem very obvious. Why does a singer or a singer songwriter that doesn't play an accompanying instrument need music theory? And again, we can even take an example of a singer songwriter where you're like, okay, I've written the melody, I've written the lyrics, okay, I've hired a producer, I've hired a keyboardist, a guitarist, a tabla player. Okay, now you guys figure out all the arrangements. But what if they can't? What if the producer isn't competent enough and the guitarist is not competent enough? And you may say, okay, what are the chances of that happening? Trust me, as someone who has been in the music scene in Bombay for this long, this happens more often than you think. So, yeah, if you want to play it safe and not even very safe, I mean safe on a basic level, I would say learn some music theory. And even if you don't want to play an accompanying instrument live, I would say at least learn some basic piano and basic guitar so that you make sure that you're never in a situation where everyone in the room is stuck and there's a song to be recorded tomorrow or a show to be played tomorrow and everyone's stuck and everyone's messing up and you don't know what to do. In conclusion, just learn music theory. At least basic to intermediate level music theory if you're a professional musician. It's not rocket science. Trust me. And I know it can look very overwhelming and there's a lot of mathematics involved, but it's okay. You don't have to learn it overnight. Like most things in life, it takes time. Just dedicate some time to learning a little every day or every week. Do it at your own pace, but definitely learn it because music is a language and it doesn't really hurt to know the grammar.
You just listened to So You Want to Be a Professional Musician, hosted by Rajesh Ravi, produced by Offspin Media Friends. This podcast is live pretty much everywhere on Spotify, on Amazon Music, on Apple Podcasts, on Audible, on Ghana, on Savan, on Wink, pretty much any other podcasting platform we could think of. Share it with a friend that you think just has to listen to this podcast. And if you don't mind, give the Offspin team a like, maybe a subscribe on their Instagram page. Keep listening to Offspin content and keep listening.
The opinions expressed in this show are personal to the guests and the host and do not necessarily represent the opinions of the producer or the platform. This show does not intend to defame and denigrate any individual or organization in India or outside. The show is created for entertainment purposes only. It does not encourage smoking, drinking, or any kind of substance use. It may contain the use of harsh language that may be considered offensive, rude, or profane by the listeners. It may also contain incidents that mention or describe mental health issues, casteism, suicide, and violence. Listeners are advised to use their discretion.